The first time my daughter-in-law publicly called me trash, she did it in front of a ballroom packed with our employees. I was still wearing my housekeeping uniform when Vanessa Perez sneered at me and said, "Can someone please get this old trash away from the guests?" A few people laughed nervously. My own son, Michael, stood right there and said absolutely nothing. I squeezed the handle of my fresh towel cart and swallowed the humiliation in absolute silence. The woman mocking me had no clue that the crystal chandeliers, her massive paychecks, and her entire designer lifestyle existed because of one single signature. Mine. Before I go on, be honest. Have you ever been judged by someone who had absolutely no clue who you really were? Tell me in the comments where you are watching from and the exact time. I love reading your stories. And if emotional family dramas like this touch your heart, please like and subscribe so we can share more of these journeys together. I live in a tiny brick house on the outskirts of Chicago, in a neighborhood my own family pretends does not exist anymore. The paint on my front porch is peeling, and the mailbox leans hard to the left whenever the wind blows. My kitchen faucet squeaks loudly whenever I make morning coffee. But after my husband Richard died, I stopped caring about luxury. Silence was easier to face than empty rooms. Most mornings, I wake up before sunrise, tie up my gray hair, and drive my old silver Toyota 15 miles into downtown Chicago. By 6:30, I am inside the Perez Grand Hotel, wearing a blue housekeeping uniform with my name stitched on the front. Penelope. Just my first name. That was crucial. Nobody here knew that I, Penelope Perez, was the very woman whose signature quietly controlled the family trust behind this entire hotel chain. To everyone else, I was just an old lady pushing a laundry cart down corridors of gold and marble. Honestly, some days I liked being invisible. When people think you are nobody, they show you exactly who they really are. That morning, I was folding sheets with Angela Brooks in the laundry room when she groaned and rubbed her lower back. "My knees are killing me today," she whispered. "You need to sit down," I told her softly. Angela just laughed. "And let Vanessa catch me resting? Oh, Lord, no." Hearing my daughter-in-law's name made my chest tighten. Angela had no idea Vanessa was married to my son. None of them knew. I had kept my personal life hidden from everyone for nearly 3 years. Angela leaned in and whispered, "Did you hear the rumors?" "What rumors?" "They are talking about layoffs." I kept folding. "Who said that?" One of the kitchen managers overheard corporate talking. "They want to fire the older staff first because of healthcare costs." I went completely cold. Richard would have never let them do that, and neither would I. This company was not built by executives in expensive suits. It was built by exhausted workers pulling double shifts, missing family birthdays and anniversaries just to keep the guests happy. People like me. Back in 1981, Richard and I opened our first motel near San Antonio, using money from his uncle and my own hard-earned savings from waitressing. I still remember hauling dirty laundry down 2 flights of stairs while I was 7 months pregnant with Michael. Richard would kiss my forehead and say, "One day we will own something beautiful." Even when we made millions, we never forgot the sweat it took. At least my husband never did. Suddenly, loud laughter echoed from the hallway right outside our door. Moments later, Vanessa strolled in, wearing a designer coat that cost more than my car. 2 assistants trailed behind her, holding coffee and tablets. The laundry room went dead silent. Vanessa looked around with pure disgust, as if the smell of laundry detergent offended her soul. "Why is it so hot in here?" she complained. Silence. Beside me, Angela stood tall. "Good morning, Mrs. Carter Perez." Vanessa ignored her and locked eyes with me. That cold, familiar expression immediately washed over her face, a mix of shame and disgust. She hated seeing me, not out of concern, but because my presence shattered the high society image she desperately wanted to project. "My God," she muttered. "Are you still working here?" I just offered her a polite smile. "Good morning, Vanessa." Her assistant looked stunned, wondering why a mere housekeeper was addressing a top executive so casually. Vanessa crossed her arms. "You missed a stain on the third-floor carpet yesterday. I will recheck it. You should have done it right the first time." Her voice was quiet, but sharp enough to cut the air. Angela stepped forward, trying to help. "Actually, that stain returned after a guest spilled wine." "I was not speaking to you," Vanessa snapped. Angela shrank back. Something hot burned inside me, not rage, but a deep, heavy disappointment. I remembered when my son Michael first introduced us 6 years ago. She seemed so sweet and nervous then, telling me how her parents struggled to pay bills in Texas. She actually cried at dinner, saying she just wanted a family who loved her. I believed her. That was my mistake. Vanessa looked me up and down, then turned to her team. "We seriously need stricter dress codes for the staff here. This hotel represents pure luxury," she said, looking down at my old, worn shoes. Her assistants laughed awkwardly, but I kept my face completely calm. Years ago, those words would have broken me. But life teaches you a secret. Humiliation only has power if you let yourself feel it. Vanessa turned back. "And Penelope, use the service elevator from now on. Guests complained." That one actually stung, not because of her petty words, but because she degraded me in front of everyone. I nodded. Of course. Satisfied, Vanessa strutted away, her heels clicking loudly on the tile. The room stayed dead silent after she left. Finally, Angela whispered, "I am sorry for what?" "She treats you terribly." I managed a small smile. Some people spend their whole lives trying to feel important. Angela studied me carefully, then said, "You do not act like a normal housekeeper." I nearly laughed. If only she knew. On my afternoon lunch break, I sat alone in the employee courtyard with a cup of soup, watching snow drift over the streets. I used to have lunch in executive dining rooms next to politicians. Now I sat on a freezing metal bench with the janitors. Strangely, these people felt far more genuine than the wealthy crowd Vanessa chased. Then my phone buzzed. Michael. My heart lifted for a second. I picked up immediately. "Hello, sweetheart." His voice sounded so distracted. "Hey, Mom." Mom, not Mother. He only called me Mom when Vanessa wasn't near. "Coming to dinner Friday?" he asked. I didn't know I was invited. Then, quietly, "Vanessa is hosting some business friends. It would mean a lot if you came." I stared at the steam from my soup. Once, Michael used to beg me to stay longer whenever I visited. Now, even a simple invite sounded like a negotiated deal. "I will think about it," I said softly. A long pause stretched between us. Then, he lowered his voice even more. "Mom, maybe don't wear your work uniform if you come." Those words cut deeper than Vanessa's insults ever could. Strangers being cruel is painful. But shame from your own child, that kind of heartbreak settles deep in your bones. After we hung up, I sat there, watching snow gather on the courtyard edges. For the first time in years, I wondered if my silence was turning into weakness. Friday night arrived colder than usual. The Chicago wind whipped between the skyscrapers, stinging my cheeks as I stepped out of my car and stared up at their massive glass tower. Their penthouse sat near the top, glowing against the dark sky like something untouchable. My late husband, Richard, loved buildings like this, not for the cost, but for the craftsmanship. I pulled my coat tight and walked into the lobby, carrying the small peach cobbler I had spent the afternoon baking. Michael used to beg for this cobbler on his birthdays as a little boy. He used to sit on the counter swinging his legs while I baked. "Don't burn the edges, Mom," he'd tease. Those moments felt a lifetime away now. The elevator ride up was silent, save for the soft piano music. But when the doors opened, I could already hear laughter spilling from the apartment. A young hostess in black greeted me stiffly. "You must be Penelope." "Not Mrs. Perez, just my first name." I smiled politely. "Good evening." The penthouse looked straight out of an architecture magazine. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed off the glittering Chicago skyline, and crystal chandeliers gleamed over polished marble. Every single inch was designed to impress. But despite all the beauty, the place felt cold. Not physically, but emotionally. Vanessa appeared moments later, dripping in diamonds and emeralds. "Oh," she said, sounding utterly disappointed. "You actually came." I ignored the jab and held out the dish. "I brought dessert." Vanessa sneered at it like a bag of trash. "How homemade." Before I could reply, two elegantly dressed couples walked in from the dining room. Vanessa instantly brightened. "There she is," a woman gushed. "Vanessa, your apartment is unreal." Vanessa laughed, playing the part. "Thanks, Michael. And I barely have time to enjoy it, since we basically live at the company." Hearing her say, "my company," made my stomach turn. Michael finally walked in, wearing a dark suit. The second he saw me, guilt flashed across his face. "Mom," he muttered. He gave me a quick, nervous kiss on the cheek, immediately glancing at Vanessa to gauge her reaction. It hurt deeply. Vanessa clapped her hands. "Everyone, this is Michael's mother, Penelope." One of the men smiled. "Nice to meet you." Before I could even speak, Vanessa added casually, "She works housekeeping at one of our hotels. She likes keeping busy." The room shifted instantly. Polite smiles, awkward nods. It was that look people give when they calculate your worth. I had seen it before, but from my own family, it stung. A woman tilted her head. "Well, that is admirable." Such a cruel word when spoken with pure pity. I kept smiling. Dinner began shortly after. That table alone probably cost more than Richard and I made in our first 2 years of marriage. Vanessa sat at the head of the table like a queen, entertaining her subjects. The conversation quickly shifted to business. "Our luxury division is outperforming expectations," Vanessa boasted over wine. "Honestly, the brand image improvements have been completely transformational." Michael nodded tiredly. Vanessa led most of that. "Oh, I practically run the company these days," she joked. Everyone laughed. I watched my son. Once, Michael hated arrogance. As a boy, he would give away half his lunch if a classmate had nothing. Richard loved that gentle heart of his. But somewhere along the way, my son learned that staying quiet was easier than speaking up. Vanessa turned to me. "You know, Penelope, We're thinking of modernizing staffing standards across all our hotels. I dabbed my napkin calmly. What kind of standards? Presentation, energy, and efficiency. She gave a thin smile. Luxury clients do not want tired-looking employees dragging carts. Michael shifted uncomfortably. I stared right at Vanessa. Those tired employees built the reputation your clients enjoy. She just laughed softly. Well, of course, but times change. One of the businessmen raised his glass. That is why younger leadership matters. Vanessa beamed at the compliment. My mind drifted back decades. Richard and I were eating cheap takeout in our tiny motel office, while baby Michael slept in a laundry basket because we could not afford a crib. Richard stared at the financial reports and sighed. If we ever make it, promise me something. What? We never become the kind of people who forget where we came from. Back then, I thought keeping that promise would be easy. Now, I was not so sure. Vanessa's voice snapped me back. Honestly, she went on, sometimes emotional attachment is what ruins businesses. You have to cut the dead weight. Dead weight. There it was again. I saw Michael staring down at his plate. Some employees, Vanessa said casually, stay too long simply because people feel guilty. Her message was clear. She was not just talking about the staff. She meant me. One of the women at the table leaned closer. How do you handle difficult staff? Vanessa smirked before answering. You remind them that everyone is replaceable. Something inside me broke. Not because of her insult, but because Richard would have been heartbroken to hear those words linked to our family name. I set my fork down. Do you know, I said softly, when Richard and I opened our first motel, we cleaned every single room ourselves. A hush fell over the table. Vanessa smiled politely, patronizing an old story she did not care about. I kept talking anyway. One winter, our heat failed during a blizzard. Richard stayed awake for 36 hours, moving portable heaters from room to room so no one would freeze. Michael looked up at me. I saw the memory hit him too. Richard used to say, I added, that businesses do not survive just because of money. They survive because workers believe they matter. Vanessa sipped her wine. That is a beautiful sentiment, she replied. But modern companies require tougher decisions. I held her gaze. And compassion is weakness? Vanessa smiled again. No, she said smoothly. Compassion is just expensive. Silence enveloped the table. Michael tried to speak, but Vanessa interrupted him. I am just being realistic. I watched her for a few silent seconds, and the truth became painfully obvious. Vanessa genuinely believed this empire belonged to her world now. The designer dresses, the wealthy investors, the luxury branding. She had absolutely no clue that the woman she patronized still controlled the ground beneath her feet. When dessert arrived, Vanessa never served the cobbler I had brought. I saw it sitting untouched on the kitchen counter, abandoned near the trash can. Strangely, that stung the worst of all. When I finally left the penthouse, snow was falling. Michael walked me down to the lobby in silence. Neither of us spoke at first. Then, quietly, almost ashamed, he murmured, "You know how Vanessa is." I looked at my son, the boy I once held through childhood fevers. He was a stranger to me now. "Yes," I whispered. I think I finally do. The law offices of Whitmore and Green occupied the 22nd floor of a stone building overlooking Lake Michigan. Richard joked that Margaret chose it because it looked intimidating enough to scare dishonest people before they even walked inside. Stepping out of the elevator on Monday morning, I immediately caught the familiar scent of old leather-bound books, rich coffee, and freshly polished wood. Some things never change. Margaret's assistant welcomed me warmly. "Mrs. Perez, she is waiting for you." Mrs. Perez. It is funny how differently people talk to you when they know your last name. Margaret stood up the moment I walked in. At 72 years old, she remained as sharp as broken glass. Silver hair framed her face, and her dark blue suit looked perfectly pressed as always. But when she saw me, her eyes softened. "You look tired, Penelope." I let out a soft laugh. "Is it that obvious?" "Yes." I sat across from her desk, quietly placing my gloves in my lap as silence stretched between us. Margaret had managed Richard's legal affairs for nearly 30 years. She knew every version of me. The ambitious young woman building an empire with her husband, the grieving widow, and now this quiet housekeeper hiding in plain sight. Finally, she slid a heavy folder across the desk. "I wish I were calling you here under better circumstances." My stomach sank. I opened the folder to find layoff projections, health care cuts, and restructuring proposals. Vanessa's digital signature sat at the top of several pages. Cold anger surged as I read. "They want to lay off 43 employees?" I asked softly. Margaret nodded. "Most are over 55, she added. "Housekeeping, laundry, kitchen staff, maintenance." I turned the page. "Annual savings, insurance reduction targets, cheap replacement labor." The language felt so cold on paper. No humanity, just numbers. But I knew the people behind those numbers. Angela's husband fighting cancer. Mr. Delaney supporting his disabled son. Maria raising 3 grandchildren after her daughter's death. People Vanessa had never bothered to learn the names of. I closed the folder. "When was this submitted?" 3 weeks ago." "And Michael approved this?" Margaret hesitated. "It is complicated." "No," I said softly. "It is not." A heavy silence grew between us. Finally, Margaret pulled another document from her drawer and handed it over. Richard's trust agreement. Even after all these years, seeing his signature still cut deep. My fingers brushed the page. "Richard updated this 6 months before he passed," Margaret said gently. "Do you remember that?" Of course I did. Richard already knew the cancer was spreading by then, though he hid it from Michael. He spent his last months setting everything up. Not for himself, but for me, our son, and the company. "You still hold controlling ownership through the trust," Margaret continued. 51%. Michael is chief operating officer, but final authority stays with you. I stared out the office window, watching the gray Chicago skyline. "When Michael was younger," I whispered, "Richard believed he'd grow into leadership naturally." Margaret folded her hands. He also worried Michael wanted approval too badly. That truth cut deep. My son had always hated disappointing the people around him. Even as a kid, if his friends fought, he'd cry trying to make peace. If Richard raised his voice, Michael immediately blamed himself, even when he did absolutely nothing wrong. Margaret studied my reaction. "Have you told Michael the trust is still entirely under your control?" "No, because I wanted my son to love me for who I am, without money in the way." but I kept that to myself. Instead, I stared at Richard's signature on the paper. He wanted Michael to earn his confidence, I whispered, not inherit it. Margaret nodded slowly and reached for another file. This might hurt to see. Inside were luxury expense reports, private jet bills, and designer consultant invoices. I frowned. What is this, Vanessa's spending? The numbers were astronomical. Just one dinner party cost nearly $80,000. The next page detailed company money wasted on influencers and personal branding. She billed this to corporate hospitality? I asked. Margaret nodded. I looked up, horrified. Does Michael know? I suspect he just signs whatever she puts in front of him. That sounded just like my son these days. Too drained to fight, too desperate to avoid conflict. Margaret leaned back. There's more. She passed me a few printed emails. One from Vanessa read, older staff ruin the luxury aesthetic. We need younger faces for an aspirational brand. Another said, sentimentality is hurting our profit margins. I read it twice. My hands started shaking, not from anger, but pure heartbreak. Our company, Perez Grand Hospitality, used to be famous for treating its workers like gold. Richard always visited our hotel kitchens on holidays to thank the Christmas staff personally. When a janitor lost his wife 20 years ago, Richard quietly covered the funeral costs. He saw workers as family. To Vanessa, they were just replaceable decorations. Margaret's voice softened. Penelope, if these layoffs go through, the lawsuits will destroy us. Age discrimination alone will ruin our reputation. I closed my eyes. For years, I hid from the world because losing Richard had completely broken me. Being in the spotlight felt impossible without my husband. Honestly, I wanted Michael to find his own strength, but my silence had only let something toxic take root. Margaret watched me in silence for a moment. Richard told me something right after Michael got married. I looked up. He said, Vanessa confuses appearance with real value. A dull ache tightened in my chest. My husband saw it, even back then. He also said, Margaret added gently, if Penelope ever walks away from the company, nobody will be left to protect its soul. That absolutely crushed me. I realized I hadn't just stepped away from my power. I had abandoned my duty. And this company didn't just belong to us. Thousands of families relied on us. Finally, Margaret asked the question hanging between us all morning. What do you want to do? I stared at the falling snow outside. After a long, heavy silence, I quietly asked, when is the anniversary gala? 3 weeks. I nodded. Every year, we hosted a massive gala to celebrate the founding of Perez Grand Hospitality. Investors, board members, and the press would all be there. Vanessa lived for that event. It was her favorite stage. Margaret's eyes narrowed. Margaret, I'm going. For the first time today, she smiled. Good. I stood and grabbed my coat, pausing by the door before walking out. Margaret, if Richard were still here, my voice cracked, would he think I failed our son? Her expression softened completely. No, she said firmly. Richard would know you loved him enough to keep trying. The elevator ride down felt incredibly heavy, not because I was afraid of a fight, but because I knew my soul had already shifted. I had spent years calling my silence kindness, but that silence only protected the wrong people. Somewhere Between housekeeping uniforms and boardroom lies, my family lost the true meaning of our name. It was time to remind them. The housekeeping break room reeked of burnt coffee and bleach. By 7 in the morning, we were all already exhausted. Angela sat hunched at the plastic table, massaging her sore wrists. Near the vending machine, Maria from laundry quietly counted out her last few coins. Stirring cheap creamer into my stale coffee, I realized just how quiet everyone had become lately. Fear changes everything. People stop laughing. The whispers grow quiet, and everyone looks over their shoulders before speaking a single word. This past week, that dread spread through the hotel faster than the winter flu. Angela finally spoke up. "My husband's treatment got delayed again," she whispered. Maria looked up instantly. "Why? Insurance issues?" Angela managed a weak smile that didn't fool a soul. "The hospital needs approval first." I sat down next to her. "How is he?" "Tired," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Some days he can't even stand." Angela had been with us for 22 years. 22 years. Long enough to watch endless management teams come and go. Long enough to sacrifice holidays, school plays, and anniversaries. And now, one corporate pen stroke could wipe out her health care entirely. It made me physically sick. Before I could say a word, the break room door slammed open against the wall. Vanessa walked in, clutching a tablet and an iced coffee, with 2 nervous HR managers trailing her. The entire room went dead silent. She glanced around with clear irritation. "Why is everyone sitting?" she snapped. Angela stood immediately, despite her obvious physical pain. "We are on break," she said softly, as Vanessa dramatically checked her watch. Well, break is over. Nobody argued. No one ever did. That was what I hated most. Fear had taught good people to shrink. Her eyes landed on me next. She frowned, clearly annoyed by my very existence. "You," she said, pointing toward a hallway cart. "There is dust on the banquet room molding. I will handle it. You should have already." She used that same cruel tone she always saved for me around others. One of the HR managers shifted uncomfortably beside her. Vanessa turned back to face the room. "Conference room. 10 minutes. Mandatory staffing meeting." Then she walked out. The second the door closed, Angela let out a shaky breath. Maria muttered that the woman scared her. I stared into my coffee. Vanessa did not scare me anymore. She just disappointed me. 10 minutes later, nearly 40 of us crowded into a bland conference room downstairs. Our housekeeping staff lined the back walls, while kitchen and maintenance workers took the chairs. Nobody spoke. Vanessa stood by the screen in a tailored white suit, looking more like a politician than an executive. My son stood nearby with Marcus Hill, our chief financial officer. My son looked exhausted. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his shoulders sagged under his expensive suit jacket. He barely looked at us as we filed in. Vanessa smiled brightly once everyone settled. "Thank you all for coming," she began. "As you know, Perez Grand Hospitality is entering a new era. Corporate talk is always dangerous." She clicked her remote. A graph appeared. "Luxury hospitality is evolving," she continued. "To stay competitive, we must modernize operations and maximize efficiency." I saw coworkers exchange nervous glances. Vanessa kept going. "Unfortunately, that means difficult decisions." There it was. Angela looked down instantly, while Maria squeezed her hands together tightly. Vanessa paced like a motivational speaker. Some positions within the company no longer align with our long-term brand vision. Positions, not people. That is how executives distance themselves from guilt. Michael finally spoke up softly. Vanessa, but she talked right over him. We need energy, adaptability, presentation. Then she smiled. Frankly, some departments have dead weight. The room froze at those words. Angela flinched beside me, and Maria started crying. A maintenance worker muttered, "Jesus Christ." Vanessa ignored him. "We will begin evaluating staff performance immediately," she announced. "Those unable to meet these standards may be released." Released. A polished word for destroying lives. I looked at Michael, who just stared silently at the table. He was not defending us or stopping her, just surviving. Somehow, that hurt worse than Vanessa's cruelty. A young housekeeper in the back raised a trembling hand. "What happens to health care?" Vanessa barely blinked. "Those details are still being finalized." The girl swallowed hard. "My mother has surgery next month," Vanessa sighed. This is exactly the emotional thinking that hurts business. I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not yet. Something much colder. Resolve. Angela spoke up beside me, her voice respectful but firm. "Some of us gave decades here." Vanessa looked right at her. "And the company compensated you." Angela's face fell. I could not stay quiet. "Loyalty is not a burden," I said calmly. Everyone turned to look. Vanessa blinked slowly. "Excuse me?" I stood straighter. "People built this company," I continued, "not branding campaigns." Vanessa laughed. "This conversation is above your pay grade, Penelope." A few uncomfortable chuckles rippled through the room. My cheeks burned, but I stayed calm. Vanessa stepped closer. "You clean rooms?" she whispered, her quiet voice dripping with malice. "You do not understand executive strategy." The silence that followed was suffocating. Then she eyed me up and down. "Honestly, the hotel has enough old trash cluttering the halls." Angela gasped, and Maria looked horrified. Even Marcus Hill shifted. But Michael said nothing. Not one word. I looked at my son, begging him silently, "Please, just once, say something." But he only rubbed his forehead, staring at the floor. Suddenly, a devastating realization hit me. Michael was not protecting Vanessa because he agreed with her. He was protecting himself from conflict. That kind of weakness destroys families slowly. Vanessa turned away dismissively. Meeting adjourned. People filed out quietly, many wiping away tears. Angela lingered beside me afterward. "I am sorry," she whispered. I managed a small smile. "You have nothing to apologize for." Inside, my heart grew heavy. This company once stood for something beautiful. Richard used to memorize everyone's name. He attended our funerals, graduations, and retirement dinners. He believed business without humanity was poison. Now his son stood silent as we were humiliated like garbage. Once the room cleared, I stayed behind to gather the abandoned papers. That is when I noticed someone approaching quietly. Olivia Reed, a young assistant. She looked nervous. "Mrs. Penelope?" "Yes." She checked the hallway nervously before sliding a folded envelope into my hand. "You didn't get this from me." I frowned. "What is it?" I asked. "Internal HR projections," she whispered, "and copies of executive expense approvals." My pulse slowed. "Why me?" I asked. Olivia glanced back at the door, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Because good people are terrified, and someone has to stop her." Before I could answer, she slipped away. I stood there, staring down at the envelope in my hands. It felt heavy, dangerous, critical. Slowly, I slid it into my bag. I looked around the empty boardroom one last time. The polished mahogany, the high-end lighting, the hollow corporate slogans. For the first time in years, I stopped feeling like a tired housekeeper. I was starting to remember exactly who I was. I didn't open Olivia's envelope until long after midnight. My house was completely silent, save for the ticking clock and the faint, cold wind howling outside my window. Snow drifted against the glass while I sat alone under the warm glow of the pendant lamp Richard hung 30 years ago. I brewed some hot tea first. Richard always believed bad news shouldn't be faced without a hot cup. By the time I unfolded the papers, my hands were already freezing. Detailed expense reports, secret internal approvals, lavish travel invoices billed to our company. I adjusted my reading glasses and kept turning the pages. Private spa trips, luxury designer clothing, a $70,000 dinner in New York, and a 3-day corporate retreat in Napa that clearly had more champagne than work. Every single line approved under Vanessa's watch. My jaw clenched. But then I noticed something even worse. Projected payroll cuts, staff layoff lists, and slashed employee health care benefits. It was right there in black and white. Vanessa wasn't just chasing investor approval. She was funding her greed by stripping security from loyal staff who had built this company. I shut the folder slowly and leaned back, staring out into the dark, quiet corners of my kitchen for a long time. My mind kept drifting to Angela, Maria, and the absolute dread in that meeting. Behind it lay a painful truth I had to face. I had let this happen. Silence has consequences. Suddenly, my phone rang, startling me in the quiet house. "Margaret," I said, "is everything okay?" "Marcus wants a private meeting tomorrow morning about Vanessa," she told me. I simply said yes. Her heavy tone said it all. The following morning, I walked into a quiet diner near corporate headquarters just past 8. Marcus sat alone in the back, bundled in a dark coat, looking like he hadn't slept in weeks. He stood up stiffly when he saw me. "Mrs. Perez." I gave a small smile. "You can still call me Penelope." He hesitated, then sat. Marcus had been with our company for 15 years. My late husband trusted him deeply because he valued integrity over polish. If Marcus looked this terrified, we were in deep trouble. The waitress poured our coffee before either of us spoke. Finally, Marcus pushed a tablet toward me. "I don't know what Margaret told you yet. Enough to know I should have stepped in earlier." Marcus sighed heavily. "Vanessa's spending has exploded over the last 18 months, he warned. I opened the financial files. Raw numbers filled the screen, inflated marketing, elite consulting fees, and massive corporate payouts. These approvals, I noted quietly, they still need trust authorization, don't they?" Marcus nodded. Every major payout inside the company ultimately had to pass through our family trust. The trust Richard built before he passed, where I held sole signing power. That system was built to guard us against reckless greed. It proved one thing. Vanessa never cared to learn how this empire actually operates. She only cares about the spotlight. She thought Michael had full control, Marcus explained gently. And my son? Marcus looked weary. Michael signs whatever keeps peace at home. The truth stung. Michael used to challenge everything when he worked with his father. He was thoughtful, driven, and kind. Now he looked perpetually drained, somehow smaller. Marcus leaned forward, lowering his voice. She is forcing massive staff cuts right around the anniversary gala. When? Right after. I stared. Of course. She wanted the applause before swinging the axe. Public image was everything to her. People's lives meant nothing. Marcus rubbed his temples. I tried to warn him. What did he say? He said she was under pressure from investors. I almost laughed. Investors. That faceless, convenient scapegoat leaders use when they choose to be heartless. My Richard always said that leadership reveals true character the moment money gets involved. Marcus studied my face. Can I ask you something honestly? Always, I said. Why did you stay away for so long? The question hung heavy between us. I stared down at my cup. Because grief emptied me out so completely, I couldn't face the boardrooms, the press, or the glitzy galas. Watching Michael build his own path felt healthier than clinging to power. And maybe I hoped my son would find his own way back without my interference. But I kept it simple. I thought stepping back would help him grow. Marcus gave a slow nod, speaking softly. Sometimes good people mistake absence for trust. Those words echoed in my mind long after he left. By late afternoon, I slipped back into the hotel through the service door, wearing my simple uniform once more. It is striking how clothes change your entire world. In executive meetings, people listened closely. Down in these housekeeping hallways, they barely look at me. I found Angela vacuuming near the west ballroom and approached. You okay? I asked softly. She forced a smile, claiming she was just tired, but her eyes were red. I touched her arm. What happened? I asked. Angela swallowed hard before answering. My husband's doctor called this morning. Her voice shook. The treatments are working, but we can't lose insurance. My chest ached. She looked so ashamed, as if survival itself embarrassed her. I wanted to tell her everything right then, that the layoffs hadn't actually happened yet, that this company still belonged to someone who remembered we mattered, that she wasn't disposable. But I couldn't say it, not yet. Instead, I squeezed her hand. You've given years to this place, I told her. Never forget your value. Angela smiled sadly, saying people like us are easy to replace. No, that was Vanessa's lie. The powerful stay powerful by convincing workers they're invisible. Laughter echoed down the hallway. Vanessa appeared moments later, walking beside Michael and two coordinators to discuss preparations for the big anniversary gala. The floral arrangements must feel more elite, Vanessa demanded sharply. I want this entire evening dripping luxury. Then she spotted me. Her expression instantly changed. Annoyance, embarrassment, disgust. Why is this cart still here? She snapped. I calmly looked down at it. I'm restocking linens for the ballroom. Vanessa sighed. Can we please avoid housekeeping staff wandering through executive areas during gala preparation? Michael glanced toward me briefly. For a split second, guilt flickered across his face, but then he looked away. Vanessa kept talking as if I wasn't there. This event is attracting investors from New York and Los Angeles. Image matters. Something inside me finally hardened completely. Not with anger, but clarity. I suddenly understood something important. Vanessa truly believed luxury made her powerful. But true power is much quieter than that. True power signs the checks. True power protects people. It doesn't need attention to exist. Vanessa turned to me impatiently. Well, move the cart. I met her eyes calmly. For the first time, I didn't lower mine. Something about that unsettled her, just enough for me to notice. Good. In 3 weeks at our anniversary gala, she was obsessively preparing to rule. The entire world beneath her designer heels was about to shift. And this time, I wasn't staying silent. I used to think cruel people were just born that way. Age teaches you. That's not always true. Cruelty grows slowly inside those who spent their entire lives terrified of feeling small. And Vanessa had spent most of her life terrified. I learned that long before Michael married her, back when she still smiled easily, back when she laughed without sounding rehearsed, and looked at my son as her safety instead of status. The first time she visited our family home years ago, she cried while helping me wash dishes. I know this sounds stupid, she admitted quietly, but I've never had a peaceful family dinner before. I dried a plate slowly while she opened up about her father's drinking. Her mother worked 2 jobs while debt collectors called constantly. Vanessa told me she spent most of high school pretending she wasn't poor. I used to hide my thrift store shoes in my locker, she confessed with embarrassed laughter. I'd change before class because kids were mean back then. My heart broke for her. Now I realize something else broke inside Vanessa, too. Poverty embarrassed her so deeply that she built her entire adult identity around escaping it. And somewhere along the way, she stopped seeing ordinary, everyday people as human beings. Instead, she saw them as painful reminders. 3 days after meeting Marcus, I arrived at our hotel earlier than usual. Blizzards had frozen the city overnight. Exhausted employees shuffled through the lobby with wet boots and coffee cups, while Vanessa stood by reception, directing a photography crew. No, 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 she snapped. The flowers need to look effortless, not cheap. A stylist rushed forward, nervously adjusting the display. I pushed my housekeeping cart toward the elevator, hoping to blend in. Naturally, Vanessa spotted me immediately. Her eyes narrowed. Why are housekeeping carts visible during media prep? One photographer glanced awkwardly in my direction. Guests still need clean rooms, I said calmly. Vanessa rolled her eyes dramatically. Everything is always so difficult with you. Michael stood nearby, quietly reviewing paperwork on his tablet. He looked distracted again, tired, detached. I wondered if he even recognized who he was anymore. Vanessa turned back to the photographers, smiling brightly as if nothing happened. Okay, let's continue. Her voice instantly transformed the second wealth and cameras appeared. That was her real talent. Transformation. By lunchtime, clips of our hotel shoot were already online. Olivia showed me one while we folded linens together in storage. Vanessa stood beneath crystal chandeliers, speaking elegantly about the future of luxury hospitality. Thousands had already liked the video. She's good on camera, Olivia admitted carefully. Yes, I said quietly. Because charisma wasn't her problem. Empathy was. Olivia hesitated before lowering her voice. I found more expense approvals. I looked up immediately. How bad? She bit her lip. Worse than before. That evening after my shift, Olivia secretly met me down in the garage. She looked terrified the entire time. If anyone finds out I gave you these, she whispered. I won't let that happen, I promised. She handed me another envelope. Inside were executive billing records tied right to Vanessa's office. Luxury shopping billed to marketing accounts. Influencer gifting. A jewelry purchase disguised as consulting expenses. I stared at the massive totals in utter disbelief. Millions, not thousands. Millions. What about Michael? I asked softly. Has he seen these? Olivia looked conflicted. I think he just signs things without reading anymore. Her answer hurt, mostly because I already knew it was true. Michael used to question everything. Richard trained him so carefully when he first joined the company after business school. Double-check every contract, he'd say. Listen more than you speak. Respect the workers. Never treat company money like it's yours. But grief changes people, and marriage changes them too, especially when love slowly turns into emotional survival. The next morning, Marcus called, asking for another private meeting. This time, we met in his office before the executive staff arrived. Stacks of financial reports covered his desk. He looked even worse than before. Tell me honestly, he said quietly once the door closed. How far are you willing to go? I frowned, realizing Vanessa expects to take over as CEO outright. He slid another document toward me. She was already discussing future restructuring plans with investors. I read the proposal carefully. Luxury rebranding, executive expansion, massive staff cuts, increased automation, and stripping away employee housing. Everything Richard hated. My stomach turned. She's trying to build a company just for appearances, I whispered. Marcus nodded grimly. She thinks investors care more about image than loyalty. Richard used to say investors follow confidence temporarily, but employees determine whether businesses survive permanently. I sat down slowly. Marcus, why haven't you resigned? He gave a tired laugh. Because someone has to protect what's left. That answer stayed with me all day. Protect what is left. By evening, the gala planning meeting had completely consumed the hotel ballroom. Designers carried flower arrangements across marble floors, while caterers tested menu samples under Vanessa's supervision. I cleaned tables quietly near the stage, pretending not to listen. Vanessa stood beside several event coordinators, reviewing guest lists. These donors are priority seating, she instructed, and make sure staff stay invisible during the cocktail hour. Invisible, that word again. As if working people ruined luxury simply by existing. One of the younger coordinators asked nervously, "Should we reserve seating for Mrs. Perez?" Vanessa froze briefly, then gasped. "Oh, Penelope won't attend something like this." Something inside me almost smiled at that. You have no idea, sweetheart. Michael finally walked into the ballroom halfway through the meeting, looking exhausted. Vanessa immediately approached him. "Did you review the investor briefing?" "Not yet." "You need to stay focused, Michael." Her tone sharpened slightly. "This gala matters." Michael rubbed his forehead. "I know. No distractions this time." Her eyes flicked toward me briefly. I read the message loud and clear. I am the distraction. Not the fraud, cruelty, or financial abuse. Me. Michael noticed it too. For one painful second, our eyes met across the crowded ballroom, and I saw shame there. Real, deep shame. But shame without courage changes nothing. Later that night, I walked back home, carrying another stack of documents hidden in my bag. My house felt colder than usual. I stood in the kitchen, staring at an old photograph hanging right beside the refrigerator. Just Richard and me at our first motel opening. We looked exhausted, poor, and incredibly happy. I brushed the edge of the frame gently. "You were right," I whispered to his memory. Richard always warned me that unresolved insecurity eventually turns into cruelty once power enters the picture. Back then, I believed love could heal anyone. Now I know better. Love can guide people, but character decides whether they actually listen. My phone buzzed suddenly. "Michael," I answered on the third ring. "Hi, sweetheart." His voice sounded incredibly strained. "Mom, are you busy Friday night?" "What's Friday?" "Vanessa is hosting a private investor dinner before the gala." He hesitated. "She wants everyone there." Everyone. Such a dangerous word in families. I leaned slowly back against the kitchen counter. "And does she want me there?" Silence. It lasted too long. Finally, Michael answered quietly. "She wants things to look united." I closed my eyes. Not loved, not welcomed. Managed, presented, and controlled, just like everything else in Vanessa's world. But this time, something inside me had already shifted. While Vanessa spent her days building a perfect facade, I was quietly gathering the truth underneath it. And truth survives long after appearances collapse. The night of the gala arrived, wrapped in snow and silver light. Downtown Chicago glittered beneath the winter sky. Black luxury cars lined the entrance of the Perez Grand Hotel, one after another, as cameras flashed outside. Investors, executives, and high society crowds stepped onto the red carpet, draped in diamonds and tailored tuxedos. Inside, crystal chandeliers cast light across polished marble floors, while a string quartet played softly near the grand staircase. Everything looked perfect. Vanessa made sure of that. I stood completely alone in my bedroom, staring at the navy garment bag hanging from the closet door. For nearly 20 minutes, I couldn't bring myself to unzip it. Inside was the dress Richard bought me 15 years ago for our 30th anniversary, our last formal event together. I finally unzipped the bag slowly. Dark emerald silk, elegant and simple. Richard always said I looked beautiful in green because it made my eyes brighter. My fingers trembled slightly as I touched the fabric. Grief is so strange. Years pass, but certain memories still feel close enough to break you open. For a second, I almost backed out. Maybe Margaret could handle the board announcement without me. Maybe exposing Vanessa publicly would only destroy what little remained of my family. Maybe silence was still the kinder choice. Then I remembered Angela weeping over her husband's medical bills. I remembered Maria counting out coins beside the vending machine. I remembered Vanessa calling actual people dead weight. And right then, my hesitation vanished completely. An hour later, I stood before the mirror, my shaking hands fastening the pearl earrings Richard gave me. For the first time in years, I didn't look like an invisible housekeeper anymore. I looked like Penelope Perez again. The drive downtown felt surreal, with snow drifting across Michigan Avenue and holiday lights reflecting off frozen streets. Chicago was breathtaking in the winter, but the cold always made my loneliness sting just a bit more. Arriving at the hotel, I saw reporters swarming the entrance. No one recognized me at first, until a valet's eyes suddenly went wide. "Mrs. Perez!" I just smiled softly. "Good evening, Daniel," I said. His face went completely pale. Word traveled fast, and by the time I stepped into the lobby, the whispers had already started. Whispers followed me. "That's her. Oh my God, is that Penelope Perez?" The energy shifted around me instantly. Several employees straightened up nervously. Others just stared in disbelief as a quiet sadness settled deep into my chest once again. Same woman, different clothes, different treatment. That simple truth explained everything wrong with our world. The ballroom entrance glowed with gold lights and massive white floral displays. Vanessa stood near the front, greeting wealthy investors with practiced elegance. Cameras flashed constantly. She looked absolutely radiant, confident, and completely untouchable, until her eyes met mine. Her face transformed in a split second. First, confusion, then utter disbelief, then sheer panic. Her smile practically collapsed. I crossed the marble floor toward her, my heels clicking softly beneath the background music. Around us, conversations began to die down one by one. Vanessa recovered quickly, forcing another smile. "Penelope," she said tightly, "you came?" "I was invited," I answered, thinking, "but not by you." My son, Michael, appeared beside her a moment later. The instant he saw me, his face went completely pale. "Mom," he whispered, his voice barely audible. I saw it in his eyes immediately. The dress, the posture, the confidence. For the first time in years, my son remembered exactly who I really was. Vanessa leaned in close, keeping her voice low. "What are you doing here?" I met her gaze calmly. "Attending the gala?" "You could have at least warned us." Us. An interesting word. As if she actually believed she belonged by my side tonight. Suddenly, a photographer walked up to us. "Mrs. Carter Perez, can we get some photos near the stage?" Instantly, Vanessa straightened up. Her picture-perfect smile snapped right back into place. "Of course," she replied smoothly. Then she turned to me with a cold, hollow smile. "You should probably stick to the back of the room tonight. Our investors might get confused." There it was. Even now, dressed in silk and pearls, she still looked down on me. Michael looked absolutely mortified. "Vanessa," he warned quietly, but she ignored him. I simply offered her a soft, calm smile. "No," I replied. "I think tonight people deserve absolute clarity." My tone rattled her. I saw it in her eyes instantly. Good. The ballroom filled up quickly. Hundreds of guests mingled under sparkling chandeliers, while servers carried trays of champagne through the crowd. I felt the staff staring at me from all angles. Angela almost dropped her tray when she spotted me near the entrance, her eyes widening so much I nearly laughed. "Penelope," she whispered as I walked over. I reached out and gently touched her arm. "Please, don't panic," I whispered. "You're Mrs. Perez," she gasped. I gave her a nod. Poor Angela looked ready to faint, whispering, "Oh, my Lord." "I'm still me," I told her gently. Her eyes instantly filled with tears. Then, a painful realization hit me. The hotel staff was far more emotional to see me than my own son was. Across the room, Vanessa stepped onto the stage for her opening speech, the spotlights glittering behind her. She looked stunning, yet absolutely terrified. She knew something was wrong, very wrong. Near the back wall, Marcus approached me quietly, holding a glass of champagne. "The board is ready," he murmured. "And Robert arrived 10 minutes ago." I nodded slowly. Robert Sinclair had been on the Perez Grand Hospitality Board since Richard's very first days in business. Unlike Vanessa, Robert knew exactly who actually owned this company. And tonight, he was going to make sure everyone else knew it too. Suddenly, Michael walked over, looking visibly shaken. "Mom," he said quietly, "what's going on?" I looked closely at my son. Even after everything, part of me wanted to protect him. That's the painful tragedy of motherhood. No matter how deeply they hurt you, a mother's heart always wants to shield her child. "You'll understand very soon," I told him gently. Michael looked terrified now. "Please, don't do this publicly." That single sentence told me everything I needed to know. Not, "Please tell me I'm wrong." Not, "Please say Vanessa was mistaken." No, his only fear was public embarrassment. His precious image, just like Vanessa's. I looked at him sadly. "Your father always said the truth only gets dangerous when you spend too long running from it." Before Michael could reply, music swelled through the speakers. The gala's main program was officially beginning. Vanessa walked up to the microphone, smiling brilliantly as applause filled the room. She looked exactly like the future queen of Perez Grand Hospitality. And that was probably the saddest part. She truly believed that throne already belonged to her. The lights dimmed slowly. The guests turned toward the stage. Vanessa gracefully lifted the microphone. But beneath the glamour, the chandeliers, and the champagne, the foundation of her perfect world had already started to crack. She stood center stage under a cascade of crystal light, smiling as if the whole night belonged to her. In her mind, it probably did. The ballroom glowed in gold and silver as hundreds of guests watched from candlelit tables. Wall Street investors sat near the front, alongside prominent politicians and luxury hotel executives. Photographers lined the room waiting for the perfect shot. And Vanessa absolutely thrived under all that attention. "I am honored to welcome you all tonight," she began smoothly, her voice echoing through the ballroom speakers. "Perez Grand Hospitality represents not only excellence, but vision, innovation, transformation." Polite applause followed. I stood near the back beside Angela, who looked ready to faint every time she glanced at me. Across the ballroom, my son Michael stood rigid beside the stage stairs, his face turning pale during her speech. He knew something was wrong. He just did not know how bad. Vanessa continued confidently, claiming modern luxury hospitality must evolve. "We cannot survive by clinging to outdated systems or emotional decision-making." That line earned approving nods from several investors. I saw Marcus Hill close his eyes in brief frustration. Vanessa only smiled wider. "Our company's future depends on bold leadership, willing to embrace change." There it was, change. A beautiful word when used honestly, but so dangerous when used to mask greed. She spoke for 10 more minutes about growth, rebranding, and luxury expansion. Every sentence sounded polished and rehearsed, but the more she spoke, the heavier my heart became. My husband Richard built this company around people, Vanessa was rebuilding it on mere appearances. Finally, she raised her glass to the future of Perez grand hospitality. The entire ballroom applauded loudly. Vanessa smiled at the front tables and added lightly, "None of this is possible without the incredible executive leadership team my husband and I built together." My husband and I. I watched my son Michael flinch. Even now, she put herself first. Vanessa started to step away, but another voice suddenly filled the room. "Actually," Robert Sinclair said calmly, standing up near the front, "before we continue, there is one more acknowledgement to make tonight." The entire room fell silent. Vanessa blinked in surprise. Robert walked slowly toward the stage, adjusting his jacket. At 74, he still possessed that quiet authority of someone who never needed to shout to be heard. Vanessa forced a smile. "Of course, Robert." He gently took the microphone from her hand. "I have served Perez grand hospitality for nearly 4 decades," he began. "And during that time, I have witnessed extraordinary leadership." His gaze drifted across the room. "I watched Richard Perez and his wife build this company from a single roadside motel into one of the most respected hospitality groups in America." Quiet murmurs rippled through the crowd. Vanessa's smile tightened, and Robert continued. "And while many here tonight believe they know who leads this company," he paused deliberately, "very few understand who truly owns it." Total silence. I saw Vanessa stiffen instantly, while my son Michael looked frozen. Robert turned slightly toward the entrance. "Tonight," he announced clearly, "I would like to formally recognize the majority owner of Perez Grand Hospitality." My heartbeat slowed down, not speeding up, but slowing. That strange peace when the truth finally stops hiding. Robert smiled faintly. "Mrs. Penelope Perez." The room erupted into confused whispers as heads turned everywhere, searching for me. Vanessa let out a sharp, nervous laugh of disbelief. "What?" she whispered. I stepped forward slowly, and the crowd parted for me. Investors stared openly. My employees looked completely stunned. One woman near the front gasped. The sharp click of my heels echoed across the marble floor as I walked toward the stage. Vanessa's face lost all color. "No," she muttered, "that is not..." My son looked like he could not breathe. I climbed the stage steps carefully as cameras flashed wildly from every angle. The moment I reached Robert, he respectfully offered me his arm. It nearly broke my heart. In that moment, a stranger showed me more respect than my own family had in years. Robert gently handed me the microphone. The ballroom fell completely silent. Vanessa stared at me, her eyes wide with panic. "This is not funny," she whispered harshly to my son. But my son did not answer, because deep down, he already knew the truth. He just never imagined it would come out like this. Robert gestured toward the large screen behind us. Within seconds, our trust documents appeared on screen. Majority owner of the Perez Family Trust, Penelope Perez. Authorized financial signature, Penelope Perez. A collective gasp swept through the room. Vanessa physically stumbled backward. "No," she said again. "There has to be some mistake." Marcus stood up slowly from the front. "There is no mistake," he said firmly. Every eye turned to him. "As Chief Financial Officer," Marcus continued, I confirm all major company expenditures require direct approval from the Perez Family Trust. He paused, adding that I remained the sole controlling authority of that trust. Shock hit Vanessa's face so violently, it looked almost painful. Then came the final blow. Marcus looked directly at her. That includes every single executive paycheck issued over the past few years. The room exploded into whispers. Vanessa's breathing turned ragged. Slowly, almost mechanically, she looked at me. Suddenly, she finally understood. Every paycheck, every lavish bonus, every designer expense account she bragged about, signed by me, the woman she called trash. My son looked completely devastated. Not angry, just devastated. Because for once, Michael saw the damage his silence had caused. Vanessa shook her head frantically. "You worked in housekeeping," she whispered at me. "Why would you do that?" I just looked at her calmly. To see how my employees were treated, the truth hit harder than yelling ever could. Vanessa's lips parted slightly. Around us, the staff stood frozen in disbelief. I noticed Angela crying openly near the ballroom entrance. Maria covered her mouth with trembling hands. They finally understood why I listened when nobody else would. Because this company never stopped being mine. Vanessa suddenly turned to Michael. "You knew?" His face crumpled. No. That answer shattered her. If my son didn't know, her entire world was built on assumptions. Dangerous assumptions. She looked back at me, desperation creeping into her voice. "You let me humiliate myself," she said. I met her gaze. "No, Vanessa," I replied softly. "You did that to yourself." The silence afterward felt enormous. Then Robert stepped beside me again. "There will be additional announcements regarding company leadership and restructuring," he calmly informed our guests. But tonight, we felt it necessary to acknowledge the woman whose integrity protected this company long before most of us even got here. Applause started slowly somewhere in the back, growing and spreading until the entire ballroom was filled with thunderous clapping. Not for glamour, branding, or image, but for dignity. I looked out across the crowd, tears threatening to spill over, standing there beneath those glowing chandeliers as the empire Richard and I built finally remembered its soul. I realized something unexpected. I didn't feel powerful. I felt free. The applause lasted longer than Vanessa could stand. I could see it in her face. I could see every clap cracking the perfect image she had spent years building. She stood frozen on stage, breathing unevenly as camera flashes exploded around the room. I saw investors whispering behind raised glasses, while my employees stared openly, no longer hiding their shock. For the first time since I met her, Vanessa looked small. Not because she lost power, but because truth stripped away her performance. My son Michael still had not moved. He stood by the stairs, staring at me, as if he no longer recognized the mother he had pushed into the background. Maybe he didn't. Maybe somewhere along the way, I had disappeared so completely that my own son forgot who I used to be. Robert leaned toward me quietly, asking if I wanted to continue. I looked across the ballroom at Angela crying softly, at Maria gripping another housekeeper's hand, at the waiter standing completely still beside silver trays, at Vanessa, whose entire world had just collapsed beneath her designer heels. Suddenly, I realized this moment was not about revenge. It was about accountability. I stepped slowly to the microphone, and the ballroom fell silent. When Richard and I built Perez Grand Hospitality, I began softly. We had exactly 12 rooms and a leaking roof. Hearing quiet laughs ripple through the crowd, I smiled faintly. Our first guests complained constantly because the water heater broke. Richard spent nights fixing pipes while I cleaned rooms, pregnant with Michael. My son lowered his eyes. We were poor, I continued, but we promised each other something very important. I paused. We would never forget the people doing the hardest work. Complete silence. I turned slowly toward my employees standing along the ballroom walls. The housekeepers, kitchen staff, maintenance, laundry workers, and servers. My throat tightened slightly. People whose names wealthy guests rarely even remember. Several of my staff began wiping away tears. Then I looked directly at Vanessa. And yet, over the past few years, I have listened as workers here were called burdens. Vanessa swallowed hard. I continued calmly. Dead weight. A ripple of discomfort spread through the room. Old trash. This time, the silence became painful. Vanessa's face flushed red because everyone finally understood. Her insults were no longer rumors. They belonged to her. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Quiet truth carries farther than screaming ever does. I spent 3 years working inside our hotels, wearing a housekeeping uniform, I said. Not because I was ashamed of my name. I glanced around carefully, wanting to see if this company still remembered its soul. Across the room, I saw Angela cover her mouth, crying openly. I pointed gently toward my staff gathered along the walls. These people carried our company through holidays, snowstorms, pandemics, and personal tragedies. Then I looked back at Vanessa, and some of them were rewarded with humiliation. Vanessa finally stepped forward sharply. "That's not fair," she snapped, her sudden voice startling the room. She looked around desperately, saying, "You're making me sound cruel." I held her gaze. "You called human beings dead weight," I replied. Her breathing quickened. "I was talking about business efficiency." "No," I replied softly. "You were talking about people." As a low murmur spread, Vanessa turned toward my son immediately. "Say something." My son looked completely shattered. His mouth opened, then closed again. What defense did they have left? The truth stood plain before everyone, and Vanessa looked at me with growing desperation. "You worked in housekeeping behind my back," she spat. "I worked beside employees you refused to see. That's manipulation." The accusation echoed through the room. For the first time all night, anger flickered inside me. Not because she attacked me, but because even now, she couldn't admit any wrongdoing. She still saw herself as the victim. Stepping closer, I spoke calmly. "No, Vanessa. Manipulation is pretending compassion weakens us, while secretly using company funds to finance your luxury dinners and personal branding." Her face drained completely. My son's head snapped up. "What?" The ballroom erupted into whispers again, as Vanessa turned to him sharply. I wanted to shield Michael, but Marcus Hill was already marching toward the stage with a thin folder. He handed it straight to Robert. Robert opened the documents calmly and scanned the room. He announced that internal audits were investigating executive spending practices. Vanessa's voice instantly shrieked, accusing him of auditing her. The panic in her tone exposed everything. Michael stared at her in disbelief, asking what she meant. She grabbed his arm. whispering that this was why I did this publicly. She claimed I wanted to humiliate her. Humiliate. What a choice of words. I remembered standing in that laundry room while she mocked my cheap shoes, telling me to use service elevators. I remembered her calling me trash in front of everyone. But somehow, in her mind, only her pride mattered. Michael pulled his arm free, asking if she misused company money. Her eyes flashed with pure rage. She sneered that everyone spent company money. Marcus spoke up firmly, noting that not everyone billed luxury jewelry to hospitality accounts. Vanessa looked cornered now, dangerously so. And I knew that cornered people always reveal their truest, ugliest selves. Suddenly, she pointed directly at me, shouting that I never accepted her. The grand ballroom fell dead silent. Her voice cracked, weeping that I looked down on her from the start because she was not born rich. That actually surprised me, not because it was true, but because she believed it. I shook my head in sadness. She screamed that I always judged her. My chest ached because beneath her cruelty, I saw the scared, poor girl she used to be. The girl who hid thrift store shoes in school lockers, absolutely terrified of ever feeling worthless again. But pain does not excuse cruelty. I spoke gently, telling her I never cared about her past. She laughed bitterly. She spat that it was easy for billionaires to say. The room went quiet as I watched her. Quietly, I replied that Richard and I once split a single hamburger because we were broke. She froze as I added that I never judged poverty. My voice hardened. I only judged how she treated people once she escaped her poverty. That hit her harder than anything else because she knew it was true. The heavy silence lingered. Then, unexpectedly, Angela stepped forward from the very back of the crowded room. Her hands trembled as she called my name. I looked at her gently as she struggled to speak louder. She explained that when her husband's medical treatments stopped being covered, someone anonymously paid the bills. Vanessa looked lost. With tearful eyes, Angela revealed it was me. Other staff members started murmuring, and Maria shared how I helped her grandson. Another said I bought her daughter's books in secret. I closed my eyes, never having wanted any credit for those quiet deeds. Richard and I simply believed that if you had the means to help, you did. That was it. Yet, standing under those glittering lights while my staff defended me, a profound truth finally clicked in my mind. Real leadership is not built on fear, but on the lives you protect when no one is watching. The room never quite recovered. Even when the music started up again and waiters served champagne, the room felt forever altered. Guests whispered behind their hands. Investors checked their phones nervously. The staff looked at Vanessa with a new sense of clarity instead of fear. And clarity is deadly when your power relies on illusions. I slipped out before midnight, feeling utterly drained rather than overwhelmed. There is a unique kind of weariness that comes from finally speaking your truth after years of heavy silence. By the time I reached my car, fresh snow covered the glass. Chicago seemed so peaceful after midnight, almost gentle. I drove through empty streets while old memories replayed. I saw Michael as a boy, running through hotel hallways in his socks. I saw Richard teaching him to shake hands properly. I remembered Vanessa weeping in my kitchen years ago, confessing her shame about being poor. So much pain, so many missed chances to grow. Somewhere along the way, We all failed each other in our own ways. I was just taking off my earrings when 3 soft knocks sounded at the door. I knew who it was. My son stood on the porch, looking completely shattered. Snow clung to his heavy coat as the freezing wind swirled around us. He just stared at me, silent and frozen. He looked so much older tonight. Not physically, but emotionally. Quietly, I stepped aside. I told him to come in. He entered slowly, scanning my modest home as if seeing it for the first time. He looked at the worn sofa, the faded curtains, and the photos, pieces of the life he tried so hard to escape. I walked toward the kitchen. I noted he still took his tea with too much sugar. A faint, sad smile touched his lips. He agreed quietly. We stood in silence as the kettle heated. The silence between a mother and son is unlike any other. It carries too much history. Finally, I set a steaming mug before him and quietly sat down across the table. Michael cradled the warm cup but did not drink. He whispered, asking why I never told him. There it was, just pure hurt. I stared down at my tea, quietly explaining that I wanted him to become his own man. He let out a bitter laugh, saying that worked out well. His voice cracked, and my chest tightened painfully. You were always capable, Michael. He shook his head slowly. Dad was capable. You were. I frowned. You built this company beside him, and you could have too. Michael stared at the table for several seconds. Finally, he confessed the very thing I knew he had been running from for years. I knew Vanessa could be harsh, such careful language for cruelty, but I had no idea just how bad it was. His voice faltered. I didn't realize how bad it got. I studied my son in silence. Yes, he did. My words hit hard. Michael looked up sharply. You watched her humiliate everyone. Silence. You watched her insult me. Still silence. You let her treat kindness like weakness. Tears pooled in his eyes instantly. Suddenly he looked so young. Not the executive, nor the husband, just my little boy carrying a crushing weight of guilt. I kept hoping things would settle, he whispered. I closed my eyes. That was his fatal flaw. He believed avoiding conflict spared us pain. But sometimes, avoiding conflict is the very thing that destroys us. She controlled everything, he admitted in a quiet whisper. Every conversation became a war. My heart ached, not because it excused him, but because I recognized that deep, hollow exhaustion. Vanessa did not just dominate boardrooms. She devoured souls. Michael rubbed his face, bone-tired. When Dad died, he swallowed hard. Everything changed. I waited in silence. And you vanished. That cut deeper than I expected. He scanned my modest kitchen slowly. He stopped coming to meetings, stopped calling investors. He just stopped showing up. I was grieving. So was I. The raw honesty of his words nearly broke me, because he was absolutely right. Richard's death shattered us in different ways. I withdrew into silence, while Michael buried himself in work and marriage. Neither of us healed. For a long time, silence hung between us. Then, softly, he asked, Did you really work housekeeping all these years, just to watch us? I gave a faint smile. Not at first. What changed? I gazed out at the snow-covered window. In the beginning, I just wanted simplicity. After your father died, boardrooms became unbearable. Michael gave a slight nod. But then, I started noticing things. Like what? Fear. That heavy word hung in the air between us. Employees terrified of leadership. Managers obsessed with vanity. People completely forgetting how to treat one another. Michael's face fell. And me? I hesitated. Mothers spend their entire lives shielding their children from pain, even the pain they completely deserve. Finally, I whispered, "Yes." Michael bowed his head. I became weak. "No," I replied softly. "You became afraid." That broke him. The quiet tears turned into heavy sobs. I hadn't seen my son cry since my husband's funeral. Something inside me shattered all over again, watching him sit there in his expensive suit, looking completely lost. "I failed you," he whispered. "No," my firm voice surprised even me. "You failed yourself." He buried his face in trembling hands. "I loved her. I know. And now, I do not even recognize our life anymore." I reached across the table and gently touched his hand. For a few long seconds, he clung to my fingers, just like he did during childhood thunderstorms. "I should have stood up for you," he whispered. I nodded slowly. "Yes, you should have. Sometimes, truth matters far more than comfort." Michael took a shaky breath. "She said you embarrassed us." That cruel accusation hung painfully in the air. I looked around my modest kitchen. "My existence embarrassed her," I corrected quietly. His tears flowed faster after that. Finally, he asked the one question that terrified him most. "What happens now?" I thought of Vanessa standing under those grand chandeliers tonight, watching her perfect world crumble in public. I thought about the audits, the board, the employees, and beneath it all, our broken family. "I honestly do not know yet," I admitted. Michael stared into his tea. "She is furious," he murmured. "I imagine so. She believes you orchestrated all this to destroy her." I gave a sad, soft laugh. "No, sweetheart." I looked directly at him. "Vanessa destroyed herself the second she stopped treating people like human beings." Silence swallowed the kitchen once more. Finally, Michael whispered the words he had come all this way to say. "I am sorry, Mom." Simple words, long overdue, but genuine. And that mattered. I squeezed his hand gently as the snow fell outside my small home. For the first time in years, my son was truly looking at me again. Not at Vanessa, not at investors, not at the facade. Just me. Painful as this night was, it felt like a fresh beginning. The audit officially started Monday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, the executive floor felt like an unstable fault line, waiting for an earthquake. Nobody was smiling anymore. Assistants whispered behind closed doors. Department heads suddenly avoided all eye contact in the hallways. Security stood near conference rooms, pretending not to listen, while legal teams hauled stacks of files from office to office. Fear had changed sides, and Vanessa hated every second. I arrived at the hotel just after 8, wearing a cream wool coat instead of my usual housekeeping uniform for the first time in years. The reaction from the staff was instant. People straightened up when they saw me. Some smiled nervously. Others looked visibly emotional. Angela nearly dropped her clipboard. "You look beautiful," she whispered as I approached the lobby desk. I touched her arm gently. "How is your husband?" "He starts treatment next week." Tears pooled in her eyes, a direct reaction to the insurance decision. I nodded slowly. The layoffs had already been frozen on Friday night after the gala. It was one of my very first acts. Nothing was announced yet, but whisperings of hope were spreading. Good rumors this time. Stepping into the executive elevator, I caught my reflection in the glass wall. For years, I had hidden in plain sight. Now, the very atmosphere of this building felt different. Not because I had changed, but because the truth had finally been brought to light. The boardroom door stood open as I stepped upstairs. Inside, the tension was thick enough to choke on. Marcus sat at the far end, going over audit files with two outside lawyers. Robert Sinclair stood silently by the windows while board members whispered. And Vanessa, she just looked furious now, not scared at all anymore. She sat rigid at the table, dressed in black from head to toe, like she was attending a funeral. Honestly, maybe she was. Michael stood by the coffee, looking completely drained. The moment our eyes met as I walked in, his face softened just a bit. Vanessa caught it instantly, her jaw clenching. Robert cleared his throat and asked if we should begin. Silence. The lead auditor opened his folder. He explained that over the last 18 months, several executive expenses had been hidden under branding and development accounts. Vanessa crossed her arms, calling it ridiculous, but he kept going. He noted that multiple expenses looked entirely personal. The screen behind him flared to life, showing luxury jewelry, spa trips, designer contracts, and overseas flights that had nothing to do with business. Every single charge was listed with dates and approval paths. The only sound left in the room was the click of the slides. Michael stared at the projection, watching his whole life crumble right before his eyes. Vanessa snapped, claiming every boss spends money on image. Marcus answered calmly, pointing out they do not use secret reimbursement setups. She whipped around to face him, telling him not to act so righteous. He did not even flinch. Her rage only spiked. The auditor clicked to the next slide, bringing up a series of internal emails. All the color drained from Vanessa's face. She knew them. One message read, "Older staff ruin our luxury brand image." Another said, "Keep housekeepers out of sight during investor meetings." The entire boardroom went ice cold and silent. I saw board members trading horrified glances. One muttered, "Jesus Christ." Vanessa leaped up, yelling that we were taking things out of context. "No," Robert replied softly. "I think we are." Her breath caught. For the first time since I had met her, she looked totally trapped. Underneath all that rage, I finally saw what she was hiding. Pure, raw fear. When your whole identity is built on status, losing control of the narrative is terrifying. Her life depended on looking powerful. Now she was completely exposed. Michael finally found his voice, raspy and low. "Why did you hide the spending from me?" Vanessa gasped. "You are questioning me?" "Yes." That single word shifted everything. For the first time in forever, Michael sounded solid. Vanessa felt it too. She snapped that he had signed the approvals himself. "I trusted you," he said. She laughed bitterly. "Do not play the victim now." Pure agony crossed Michael's face. Sadly, she had a point. Staying silent eventually makes you an accomplice. She looked around the boardroom like a wild animal. 6 months ago, you all adored me, she spat. Now you act shocked. No one spoke because she was right. People in power ignore cruelty until the spotlight hits it. The auditor added that they had evidence of discriminatory firing practices. Vanessa rolled her eyes. Because workers over 55 were targeted? She laughed harshly. This is a business, not a daycare. Those words sealed her fate. I watched her world collapse in real time. Any remaining sympathy in that room vanished. There is a line where pride becomes indefensible. Michael squeezed his eyes shut. Softly, he asked the one question that really mattered. Did you ever care about our staff? She blinked, stunned. Who? The workers? His voice broke. Did they ever matter to you? A flicker of genuine pain crossed her face, replaced instantly by rage. I protected this firm. No, I spoke up quietly from my corner. You only cared about controlling the narrative. She whipped her head toward me. And you, hiding in maid uniforms, judging us all. I looked back at her calmly. I just listened. You humiliated me in public. My chest tightened. You humiliated yourself long before the gala. Her eyes welled with furious tears. I spent my entire life running from poverty. The heavy confession seemed to freeze the air. For one aching moment, I saw the girl she used to be. The scared kid from Texas, ashamed of her second-hand shoes. A girl desperate to never feel weak again. Somewhere along the way, though, she confused dignity with looking down on others. And that mistake ruined everything. Michael looked at her with pure sadness. You became cruel. She let out a wet, bitter laugh. And you became weak. The blow landed hard. Standing rigid, shaking as she breathed, she finally asked the question she feared most. What happens to me? Robert answered calmly but firmly. The board is voting to suspend you, pending a full legal investigation. Vanessa stared in sheer disbelief. You cannot do this. Actually, we can. Her eyes desperately searched Michael's face. Say something. Her son looked utterly crushed, but he did not back down. I cannot shield you from this anymore. That broke whatever was left of her. She stumbled back as if struck, grabbed her purse, and walked out without another word. No one stopped her. The silence she left behind felt massive. Michael kept staring at the door long after she had gone. I watched my son closely then, knowing that watching your illusions die hurts nearly as much as losing people. He finally whispered, almost to himself, I didn't realize how far things had gone. I looked at him with sadness. Sometimes people don't notice the house is burning because they have learned to live inside the smoke. By Friday morning, our story had exploded across every major news outlet in the country. Headlines flooded television screens and social media feeds long before sunrise. A luxury executive exposed in a corporate scandal. A secret hotel owner revealed after the gala. The confronted housekeeper turns out to be a billion-dollar hospitality founder. And, worst of all for Vanessa, an executive accused of calling employees dead weight. The internet devoured stories like this, especially when rich arrogance collapses so publicly. I sat quietly in my kitchen, watching the morning news as my untouched coffee grew cold beside me. Every channel replayed that gala footage on a loop. Vanessa's shocked face, the applause after Robert introduced me, and the moment Marcus confirmed those paycheck signatures. Pundits analyzed body language like courtroom evidence. But underneath all that noise, something else bothered me more. No one was talking about humanity. They were only discussing the spectacle. That is what modern culture does to pain. It turns it into entertainment. My phone rang off the hook. Board members, investors, reporters, old friends I had not spoken to in years. I ignored them all, until Margaret called. She went public, she said immediately. I closed my eyes briefly. Of course she did. What did she say? She gave an interview early this morning, Margaret hesitated. She claims you orchestrated a public humiliation campaign against her. I laughed softly, though absolutely nothing felt funny anymore. Anything else? She implied the family manipulated her from the very beginning. That part stung unexpectedly, not because it hurt my reputation, but because deep down, I knew she actually believed it. Pain distorts memory, especially when accountability arrives. Margaret exhaled quietly. Robert wants to hold a formal press conference this afternoon. No, I paused. No, I will handle it myself. Silence filled the line. Then Margaret spoke softly. Richard would be so proud of you today. Hearing that nearly made me break down. The press conference was scheduled for 4 o'clock inside our flagship hotel's main ballroom, the exact place where everything collapsed just days earlier. By 3:30, reporters crowded the lobby entrance, shoulder to shoulder. Flashing cameras bounced off marble floors as hotel security struggled to control the chaos. Upstairs, in a private preparation room, Michael stood by the window, staring silently at the Chicago skyline. He looked absolutely exhausted. He had barely slept all week. Honestly, neither had I. You don't have to do this alone, he said softly as I walked in. I smiled faintly. Neither do you. For several seconds, we just stood there together in silence. Then Michael spoke again. Vanessa moved out last night. The absolute sadness in his voice nearly broke me. Not because I missed Vanessa, but because I hated watching my son grieve the life he thought he had. Are you all right? I asked gently. He let out a dry laugh. No, honest answer. Good. Healing starts right there. Michael rubbed his forehead tiredly. She said I betrayed her. I looked at him closely. What do you think? He swallowed hard. I think I betrayed everyone. That answer held more maturity than anything I had heard from him in years. Before I could reply, a staff member knocked softly. Mrs. Perez, they are ready. The ballroom downstairs fell dead silent the moment I stepped onto the stage. Hundreds of reporters stared back at me under blinding television lights. Cameras clicked endlessly, and 1,000 questions already waited in their eyes. I slowly stepped up to the podium, while Michael stood a few feet behind me off stage. For a moment, I just looked out across the room. Then I spoke. My name is Penelope Perez. My voice echoed softly through the space. For many years, I stayed far away from the spotlight after my husband passed away. The room stayed perfectly still. Richard Perez believed businesses should always care for people before profits. I paused. Somewhere along the way, our company lost sight of that. Reporters scribbled quickly, camera lights flashing. One journalist immediately raised a hand. Mrs. Perez, did you intentionally hide your ownership from your daughter-in-law? I hid my ownership from almost everyone. Why? I thought about that carefully. Because grief changes people. The ballroom fell even quieter. For a long time after my husband died, I stopped recognizing myself. Working quietly inside our hotels reminded me who we built this business for. Another reporter called out, "Is it true you worked housekeeping for years?" Yes. Murmurs rippled instantly. Why would a majority owner clean hotel rooms? I smiled sadly. Because there is dignity in honest work. Complete silence followed. An older reporter slowly lowered his notepad. I continued before anyone could interrupt. The employees of Perez Grand Hospitality are not invisible. They are not disposable, and they are certainly not burdens. Along the ballroom walls, a few of our staff began crying quietly. I noticed Angela among them. Another reporter stood up. What is your response to Vanessa Carter Perez claiming she was publicly humiliated? That question hung heavily in the air. I could have destroyed Vanessa right then. I could have listed every expense, every insult, every petty cruelty. Instead, I took a deep, slow breath. I believe pain often turns people into versions of themselves they no longer recognize. The room stayed dead silent. I don't hate Vanessa. That visibly shocked them. She grew up terrified of being powerless, I continued softly. Unfortunately, some people respond to that fear by trying to control everyone else. A younger journalist frowned. So, you forgive her? Forgiveness is a complicated word, but I believe accountability and compassion can absolutely walk hand in hand. Then, something completely unexpected happened. Michael suddenly stepped forward beside me. The ballroom instantly erupted into whispers. My son looked terrified but determined as he slowly faced the cameras. My mother deserved better from me. Every reporter in the room fell silent. Michael swallowed hard before continuing. I saw behavior I should have challenged years ago, but I stayed quiet out of fear. His voice cracked slightly. That silence hurt our employees. It hurt my family, and it hurt my mother most of all. My eyes filled with tears. This wasn't polished or rehearsed. It was completely real. Michael turned to look at me. I am deeply sorry. The ballroom went completely still. Somewhere near the back, I heard someone quietly weeping. One reporter finally asked softly, "Mrs. Perez, after everything that has happened, what matters most to you now?" I looked around at the reporters, the cameras, our employees, and the company Richard and I built from nothing. Finally, I answered with absolute honesty. I want people to remember that success means nothing if you lose your humanity achieving it. Silence. Then, soft applause started in the back. Not loud or dramatic, just gentle, human applause. I stood there beside my son while cameras flashed beneath the crystal chandeliers. For the first time in years, Perez Grand Hospitality actually felt like ours again. 3 weeks after the press conference, the penthouse felt lonely instead of impressive, though the massive windows still overlooked the Chicago skyline. The marble floors still reflected city lights after dark, and expensive artwork hung perfectly arranged on the stark white walls. But luxury without warmth is hollow. Vanessa sat alone at the kitchen island, wearing an oversized sweater instead of designer dresses. Her bare face looked exhausted in a way I had never seen. No photographers, no investors, no assistants trailing her with coffee. Just quiet. It is funny how fast people vanish once your status disappears. Magazines had already replaced her with younger executives and their luxury business features. Former friends suddenly stopped returning her calls. Invitations dried up overnight. Even the internet moved on. Scandals are temporary entertainment, but the consequences remain. Vanessa stared blankly at her untouched wine, while rain streaked the glass. Michael had officially moved out 4 days ago. No big drama, no screaming, no broken dishes, just exhaustion. He packed 2 bags quietly and left before sunrise. That hurts much more. The intercom buzzed suddenly. Vanessa frowned. She wasn't expecting anyone. Most people only visited when this place was useful to them. She pressed the button, annoyed. Yes? It's Penelope. Silence. A long silence. Then finally, come up. When the elevator doors opened, I barely recognized her. Vanessa always used to perform confidence. Her posture used to command the room. Now she looked smaller, more human. She folded her arms tightly as I stepped inside. I figured you came to finish humiliating me. I removed my gloves slowly. If I wanted that, I would have spoken differently at the press conference. Vanessa laughed bitterly. That was mercy? Yes. My response instantly unsettled her. She looked away toward the city lights. The penthouse felt colder than usual. Not physically, but emotionally. I quietly looked around. Richard always said homes absorb energy from the people inside. This place absorbed tension, fear, and performance. Vanessa crossed her arms tighter. Michael told me you stopped the layoffs. I did, and I expanded healthcare coverage. Her jaw tightened. That is not how business works anymore. I looked at her. No, I said softly. That is exactly how good business works. She didn't answer. For a moment, rain tapped against the windows while the city glowed below. Then, Vanessa suddenly spoke. You know what the worst part is? I waited. I actually believed people respected me. There it was, the real wound. Not money, not status, just validation. Vanessa slowly walked toward the kitchen counter. They all disappeared, she whispered. Every single one. I watched her. When people love your image instead of your character, they leave the second that image cracks. Vanessa laughed softly through tears. You sound like a therapist. No, I smiled sadly, just old. That almost made her smile. She leaned against the counter, staring down into her wine. When I was 13, our electricity got shut off for 2 weeks. I stayed silent. My mother cried in the bathroom because she couldn't pay it. Her voice sounded distant, like she was speaking from far away. I promised myself I would never be powerless again. Pain moved quietly through the room. Not dramatic pain, but the exhausted kind people carry for years. I understand that fear, I said gently. Vanessa looked up sharply. No, you don't. I do. She shook her head. You had Richard. Money. I stepped closer. When we opened our first motel, we shared one winter coat because we couldn't afford 2. That made her pause. We cleaned rooms ourselves, I continued, sometimes until 3 in the morning. Vanessa stared at me. I know what fear feels like. Silence filled the room again. Then she whispered softly, "Then why did you hate me?" That question stung, because deep down she truly believed it. I shook my head slowly. I never hated you. Yes, you did. No, my voice softened. I hated watching you become cruel. Her eyes filled instantly. You judged me. I grieved for you. That shattered something. Vanessa looked away, tears sliding down her face before she could stop them. You don't know what it feels like to be looked down on. I thought of the laundry room, the housekeeping carts, the service elevators, the word trash. Then I answered honestly, I do now. She closed her eyes. For several seconds, only rain filled the silence between us. Then, Vanessa finally whispered the truth underneath it all. I was jealous of you. I frowned. Of me? You always seem so calm, she whispered, her voice cracking, even when people ignored you. I understood then. Vanessa mistook peace for weakness because she never learned how to find peace within herself. She spent her whole life performing worthiness instead. I spent years trying to be someone important, she admitted shakily. And somehow, you just walk into rooms without trying. That nearly broke my heart because she still did not truly understand. True dignity has nothing to do with wealth. It is about how you treat people who cannot benefit you. I sat down slowly across from her. Vanessa, she wiped tears angrily from her cheeks. I know I ruined everything. I considered that carefully. No, I said softly. Not everything. She laughed bitterly. Michael left. He needed space. He hates me. I thought about my son. No, I answered honestly. Michael hates who he became beside you. That silence felt heavy because it was true. Vanessa looked around the empty penthouse. All of this feels pointless now. I followed her gaze across the luxurious apartment, the chandeliers, the marble, the skyline, the expensive emptiness. Quietly, I repeated something Richard once told me during our poorest years together. Power without kindness becomes loneliness. Vanessa stared at me, and for the first time since I had known her, she stopped defending herself. She was listening, really listening. I do not know how to start over, she whispered. I looked at the frightened woman sitting right across from me. Not the executive, not the socialite, not the villain everyone online hated. Just a wounded human being who built her identity around escaping shame. Suddenly, I understood something painful. People who fear humiliation often become experts at hurting others first. I stood up, grabbing my coat. Before leaving, I walked toward her one last time. You start over, I said gently, by learning to really see people before you judge them. Tears rolled silently down her face. I touched her shoulder gently, not because she had completely earned my forgiveness. Not yet. But because hatred destroys the person carrying it too. I walked out of the penthouse while rain fell across the Chicago skyline behind us. And for the first time in a very long while, Vanessa Carter Perez sat completely alone, with nothing left to hide behind except the truth. Spring arrived quietly that year. Chicago finally thawed after months of snow and gray skies. Little by little, the city softened. Sidewalk cafes reopened, and trees along Michigan Avenue turned green. People smiled more easily when the sun returned. Healing felt a lot like that too. Slow, uneven, but possible. 6 months after the gala, Perez Grand Hospitality looked different. Not glamorous, but human. The first major policy change I approved expanded healthcare protections for our long-term employees. We strengthened retirement support programs, and staff appreciation bonuses returned for the first time in years. Most importantly, executives were now required to spend 1 week every year working directly beside operational staff in housekeeping, laundry, kitchen service, and the front desk. Marcus joked that half our executive team nearly fainted after carrying luggage carts for just one afternoon. Good. People should understand the hard work supporting their comfort. I still visited our flagship hotel often, though no longer in secret. And strangely, employees treated me almost exactly the same as before. Angela still scolded me for skipping lunch. Maria still forced cookies into my purse. The only difference now was that people stopped apologizing for existing around executives. That mattered more than anyone ever realized. One warm Thursday morning, I walked through the lobby and noticed my son, Michael, near the front desk, helping a bellman carry luggage for an elderly couple. I paused. 6 months ago, Michael would have delegated that task immediately. Now, he smiled warmly while helping the couple into the elevator himself. When he finally noticed me, embarrassment crossed his face. "What?" he asked defensively. I smiled. "Your father used to carry luggage too." That made him laugh softly. Michael had changed slowly after Vanessa left. Not dramatically. Real growth rarely happens that way. He attended therapy, reduced his intense workload, and started listening during staff meetings instead of hiding behind silence. Sometimes, grief matures people after it breaks them open. Other times, it hardens them permanently. I am grateful my son chose the first path. "Coffee later?" he asked. I would like that. As we spoke, I noticed several younger employees watching my son with cautious respect instead of fear. That was new, too. Respect earned honestly always feels quieter than authority demanded loudly. Later that afternoon, I drove across town to a small nonprofit community center on Chicago's South Side. The building was not impressive. Peeling paint, old brick, a tiny parking lot. But laughter drifted through open windows when I arrived. Inside, volunteers organized food boxes for low-income families, while children colored at folding tables nearby. Standing near the shelves, in plain jeans and no makeup, was Vanessa. She did not see me at first. She knelt beside a little girl, helping tape a torn box shut. The child hugged her, and Vanessa laughed softly in surprise. A real, unpolished human laugh. Then she looked up and saw me. Shock crossed her face before she stood. "Penelope." "Hello, Vanessa." She brushed hair behind her ear nervously. Gone were the designer dresses, the icy assistants, and the perfectly curated appearances. She still looked tired, but lighter somehow. A nonprofit coordinator walked over, offering a warm smile. "Vanessa has been saving our budget," she told me proudly. "Reorganized our donor systems." Vanessa instantly looked embarrassed. "It is nothing." No, it was not nothing. That was the point. After the coordinator left, we stood there awkwardly. Finally, Vanessa spoke quietly. "I heard about the employee reforms. We are trying." She nodded slowly, saying she was glad. Her voice held genuine sincerity now. That mattered, not because redemption erases damage, but because growth requires honesty. I looked around the community center. "You seem different here," I said. Vanessa laughed softly. "I think this is my first job where nobody cares about appearances." "How does that feel?" She paused to think carefully. "Terrifying." Then she smiled faintly, looking peaceful. I understood exactly what she meant. There is freedom in not constantly performing worthiness. Vanessa folded her arms loosely. "Michael told me you asked the board not to pursue criminal charges." I nodded once. She looked down immediately. "You did not owe me that." "No." Silence settled gently between us. Then Vanessa whispered the words I never truly expected to hear. "I am sorry." Not dramatic, not defensive, just honest. "I was cruel to you," she continued softly, "and to people who did not deserve it." My chest tightened. I spent so much time trying to feel powerful. I forgot how to be decent. The old Vanessa would have never admitted that. I looked at her. "I believe people can change," I said. She laughed sadly, asking if I really believed that. "Yes," I replied. "Why?" I thought about Richard, grief, Michael crying at my table, Angela's husband surviving, and how easily wounded people hurt others. Then I answered honestly. Because if we stop believing people can change, bitterness becomes the only future left. Vanessa's eyes filled with tears instantly. This time, she did not hide them. Outside the community center windows, late afternoon sunlight stretched across the city. For the first time since all of this began, peace quietly settled inside me. Not perfect peace. Life never gives us that. But it was enough. Before leaving, I turned to Vanessa one last time. I said gently, Richard believed the true measure of wealth had nothing to do with money. She wiped her eyes. What did he think it was? I smiled softly. How many people feel safer when you walk into a room? Vanessa cried harder after that, and honestly, so did I. That evening, Michael joined me for dinner at my small brick house. Nothing fancy, just soup, bread, and coffee afterward. At one point, he looked around the kitchen and smiled faintly. He admitted, I used to think success meant escaping places like this. I reached across the table and gently squeezed his hand. And now? Michael looked around the warm, small kitchen. Then he smiled. Now, I think this was the richest house I have ever known. Outside, spring rain tapped softly against the glass, while laughter drifted through the kitchen for the first time in years. And somewhere deep inside, I finally understood what Richard had tried teaching us all along. Money can build massive hotels, but simple, genuine kindness is what truly makes people feel at home in this world. After everything, I spent a long time thinking about how easily we judge people based on appearances. A housekeeping uniform, an old car, a quiet woman standing alone in a corner. So many people looked at me and decided my worth before they ever learned my story. But life has a way of revealing the truth. Those who speak loudest about power are often the ones most terrified of losing it. And the people who seem ordinary sometimes carry the greatest strength of all. What happened to my family taught me something I will never forget. Kindness is never weakness. True strength is not about controlling people, humiliating them, or making others feel small just to make yourself feel important. Real strength is choosing dignity even when you have been hurt. It means protecting people when nobody is watching. It is remembering the humanity of workers, strangers, and our family members alike. I also learned that silence wounds just as deeply as cruelty. My son loved me, but he stayed quiet too long because he feared conflict. Left unchecked, fear slowly destroys relationships without anyone noticing until it is too late. Yet healing is possible. Not perfect healing, nor instant forgiveness. Real healing is slower. It begins when we finally tell the truth, accept responsibility, and decide to become better than we were yesterday. If there is one thing I hope you take from my story, it is this. Never measure a person's worth by their clothes, job, age, or status. The strongest, wisest, and most generous people are often those overlooked every single day. Sometimes the person being ignored is the very one holding everything together. If this story touched your heart, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever been judged unfairly or underestimated? What do you think matters more in this life? Success or simple kindness? Please tell me where you are watching from and what time it is there. I read your comments, and your stories mean more to me than you know. If you enjoy emotional family dramas with meaningful lessons and heartfelt endings, please like, subscribe, and join me again for another story very soon.